What is the most persuasive piece of evidence you have?
I think probably a wave of sightings from 1993 where hundreds of people across the UK saw something. Most of the witnesses, again, were trained observers. They were police officers and military personnel, and it was seen by personnel at 2 RAF bases. Someone there saw it firing a beam of light down at the ground, described it as only marginally smaller than a jumbo jet, and a very low, menacing humming sound was coming from it. This was not some aircraft seen from an unusual angle. These are trained observers who know the difference. I came in as a sceptic, then I looked at the Ministry of Defence's, the real X-Files, so to speak. I had the public coming to me with reports, I spoke to military people, and the sheer weight of evidence just built up and up. Visual sightings on radar, that sort of thing. You
were asked to do this. I mean, they have, I never knew this, but they have a UFO desk at the Ministry
That's
of
right,
Defence.
yes, it's not that widely known.
Yeah, and that was your job. Which incident in particular convinced you?
There was a wave of sightings from 1993 where hundreds of people saw something across England, a large triangular craft. This is seen very commonly. The interesting thing is it was seen at a number of military bases. Some personnel there saw it fire a beam of light down at the ground.
Nick Pope has been transferred away from the UFO desk at the Ministry of Defence, but his book, Open Skies, Closed Minds, has him once again at the centre of Britain's UFO debate. It's an unlikely position for a man who started out as a dyed-in-the-wool skeptic.
When I started the UFO job at the Ministry of Defence, I really didn't know what I was letting myself in for. I came in as a skeptic and with very little knowledge of what it was all about.
Then, one startling report, and Nick Pope was never the same again.
I'd been doing the UFO job for a year or so when a case came along which really changed my perception on the whole UFO mystery. It occurred on the 30th and the 31st of March 1993, and it was without doubt one of the most major waves of sightings that Britain had ever seen.
At 1:05 a.m., March 31st, 1993, the report began, radar did not detect a massive UFO in British airspace. There were military and police eyewitnesses and impeccable documentation.
There were dozens of witnesses all over the country. Many of them, because this was late at night, were police officers on night patrol and military personnel on guard duty.
UFO investigator Doug Cooper was awakened at 2:20 that morning by a shaken Cornwall police sergeant who described what he and others had just seen.
The object was black, and it appeared to be shaped either something like a wedge shape or a delta wing shape, or indeed like a catamaran, a twin-hulled craft. There were lights on this craft, which they appeared to be at either end of it, which they described as about 500 feet apart.
At the Ministry of Defence, Nick Pope was being inundated with questions about the UFO's origins.
I launched a full inquiry into this. I made a series of very detailed checks to try and find a prosaic explanation for this. I checked aircraft movements, satellite tracks, airships, weather balloons, but after an extremely detailed inquiry that took me several weeks, I drew a complete blank. This was a genuine unknown.
Pope and Cooper persevered, in large part because of the sheer number of reliable eyewitnesses. Pope pored over the reports of Devon Patrol officers Barry Mitchell and Gus Cotty, who observed the UFO near the Bristol Channel.
Gus?
Oh, my word.
Gus and I both sort of looked at each other, and Gus stopped the car when we got out.
I've never seen anything like that before.
Certainly, the three lights that we saw, I certainly formed the opinion that they were fixed to the same object, albeit I couldn't see any object, travelling at the same speed, and had it been a conventional-sized aircraft, it would have been a deafening noise. It was probably, in our view, for about 30 seconds.
It was really strange, yeah. Those are the three lights in the position, and that's our vehicle. You just don't know what to say, do you? First time you come across something like that.
Their notes and drawings only came out after they discovered they were not alone.
It's very difficult to come out of the closet, so to speak, and talk about these things openly.
So Barry and I decided not to say anything initially, but then another officer in Cornwall came up over the radio and said that he had seen these lights. So once it had broken the ice, we just then said, "Oh yeah, we've seen them as well." And then other officers came across the radio as well to say that they'd seen the lights as well.
In fact, police all over southern England were calling dispatch with UFO sightings of their own.
The other officers who saw these lights, albeit some of those officers were in excess of 60 or 70 miles away from where we were, the timing of their sighting was exactly the same as the timing of our sighting, which, putting the whole thing together, makes it even further a bigger mystery.
Police officers are reliable. They're not given to flights of fancy, as far as we're concerned. They're reporting something which they're seeing, which they don't understand. This is basically what we're talking about. It's an object which they can't identify with. And I suppose to some extent, rather alarmed them.
At MOD, Pope read secret Air Force documents and discovered that the RAF was just as baffled as he.
He realised that something had happened. And he seems to have gone out of his way to be as helpful as he possibly could by sending me a letter with the map on it, of course. We've never had this before from anybody in that position.
Not only did Pope send a map showing when and how the UFO had traveled, he also included where. A complete list of sightings locations, including several military installations, something only the Defense Ministry knew. Pope did it because he felt the UFO posed a serious threat. Something had flown into England, and military radar didn't catch it.
I ordered the radar tapes to be impounded and sent to me in my office. I then sat down, viewed them, and then brought in an air defence expert to have another look. We were clear that there was nothing on the tape. This was very worrying. We'd got reports from military personnel of a sizable craft operating very low over two of our military bases, and there was nothing on radar. So we never had any warning, and we never even got our air defence aircraft into the air.
The MOD are faced with a situation where they have an object flying across our counties, and they have no ways of detecting it. Whether they're alien craft or otherwise is another matter. But the fact is that an unknown craft right across these counties, and the RAF do not appear to have picked it up on their radar.
If a structured craft of unknown origin has evaded detection by the Royal Air Force, the implications are global. If the world's air defense systems cannot respond, what will?
That's got to be extremely worrying, and that's got to mean that this whole UFO sighting is a matter of extreme defense significance. The party line, the Ministry of Defense standard view, is that UFOs are of no defense significance. Now, after this incident, I didn't have much time for that standard line. I felt it simply didn't stand up to the facts. And it was from this point that my views on the whole UFO phenomenon began to change. And I began to realize that it wasn't just lights in the sky. It couldn't be explained. And there may well be some extraterrestrial explanation to a hard core of these UFO sightings.
On March 30th, 1993, something happened that would shatter Nick Pope's convictions. Against all expectations, Nick became embroiled in a UFO mystery that would occupy him one way or another for the next 13 years. A massive unidentified flying object, seen by hundreds of eyewitnesses across large swathes of Britain. It is a case that to this day defies all reasonable explanation. When Nick arrived at work on the morning of March 31st, 1993, he soon realized it would be a day quite unlike any he had experienced. Something had been seen over Britain's skies the previous night. Witnesses described it as a huge triangular-shaped object with bright lights, which appeared to be flown in a controlled manner.
The phones were ringing off the hook. I picked one up. It was from a police officer down in Devon. He and his colleague had seen a UFO the night before. I took the details. This was a fairly standard part of my business, and I put the phone down. Another phone rang. Another report came in. And so it went on. Over the course of the day, more and more reports coming in, all reporting similar things. It was soon clear I had a major event on my hands.
But instead of the usual individual sighting, reports flooded onto Nick's desk from across the country, and they bore a remarkable similarity.
By this time, I think I'd probably got about 50 or 60 reports. It was clear this was a major wave of sightings. The descriptions looked to be very interesting, detailed descriptions of a structured craft, not just lights in the sky. But above all, the quality of the witnesses. I had police officers, I had military personnel. These people were seeing these lights on the underside of a triangular-shaped craft. This was the common thread running through all the reports, civil and military.
In those first few hours, Nick had no conception of what the object might be. But it was pretty clear that this was out of the ordinary. The following is based on reports from Nick's Ministry of Defence case file. 9:30 p.m., March 30th, 1993. A series of lights, which form a vast triangle, appear on the western horizon. Within seconds, they've entered British airspace and are over the coast of Wales, heading inland. 10 p.m., March 30th, 1993. An off-duty police officer in the Quantock Hills area of Somerset reports a huge object flying in from the north at low altitude. These expert witness statements were so precise that Nick could accurately track the flight path of this mysterious craft. Unlike so many supposed UFOs he's investigated in the past, which seemingly appear and disappear at will, this one seemed to have a plan. As Nick traced the craft's flight path, he was chilled to the bone. The craft had travelled directly over what were then two of Britain's key military bases, RAF Cosford and RAF Shawbury. Nick soon estimated that the craft had been seen in British airspace for nearly 5 hours. The number of sightings and the quality of the witnesses in this case were extraordinary. And all of these accounts agreed on exactly what had been seen.
One of these reports was absolutely remarkable. A craft several hundred metres in diameter, described by the witness as being rather like two Concorde aircraft seen pasted together.
And this witness was hard to dismiss. The man who had spotted the mysterious craft heading inland over the coast of Wales was a police officer. The sightings spread from early evening on the 30th into the early hours of the 31st. During that time, the massive triangular object flew over a large part of Britain with impunity. 1:10 a.m., Liscard, Cornwall. The UFO is seen by another police officer who describes a triangle of bright lights moving silently north. That police officer's eyewitness account was further substantiated by reports shortly afterwards in Devon and Cornwall. They estimated the speed of the object to be in excess of Mach 2, over 1,000 miles per hour. But the most important thing wasn't what these witnesses saw, but where they saw it.
Whatever this craft was, whatever it was doing, the places it was going in terms of the military bases made this look like some form of reconnaissance.
As he continued to analyze the sightings, Nick noticed they were grouped into two distinct waves. Those made in the early hours of March 31st, which described an object at high altitude, and another series of sightings across the previous night describing a huge triangular UFO at low altitude, with the ability to move at breakneck speeds. To Nick, the ardent skeptic, the idea of a squadron of UFOs carrying out a reconnaissance was in the realm of science fiction. There had to be something in the 60 or so reports that would bring his investigation back to Earth. Nick turned to Britain's early warning radar systems. Designed to spot incoming ballistic missiles, these radars can pinpoint an object a few inches across from a distance of hundreds of miles. Perhaps they had recorded an object or objects that might help explain the eyewitness descriptions of the UFO. The witnesses stated that what they saw was massive, perhaps as much as hundreds of meters in diameter, illuminated by 3 piercing lights, sometimes hovering, sometimes traveling at speeds estimated at over 1,000 miles per hour, without making a sound. The early warning radars confirmed that on the night in question, there were no satellites in the sky above Britain whose orbits matched the very detailed eyewitness reports of a giant triangular craft. Nick turned next to another suspect. The radar also records the thousands of tons of space debris orbiting the Earth, the collected remnants of 40 years of space exploration. Could the eyewitnesses have seen the re-entry of space junk? Sure enough, the records revealed a likely culprit. From radar readouts, he discovered that the spent booster rocket from the Russian spacecraft Cosmos 2238 had re-entered the Earth's atmosphere at the same time as some of the high-altitude UFO sightings.
Cosmos 2238 had been launched the night before, and the booster rocket had re-entered the Earth's atmosphere.
The booster rocket seemed to be in the right place at the right time.
Cosmos 2238's booster might well have been visible from parts of Devon and Cornwall, and indeed the object would have been coming in on a southeasterly bearing, and some of the times matched too. It really did begin to look as if we had an explanation.
David Clark, UFO investigator and writer for Fortean Times, has seen Nick Pope's investigation records. He agrees with Nick that Cosmos 2238 offered a solution to Britain's closest encounter.
If you look at what most witnesses described, 2 very bright white lights in the sky moving very, very rapidly across the sky with a trail coming out behind these things, which was the burning ion trail of the debris re-entering the atmosphere. Some other people described seeing a 3rd light, and this is where you get the effect of people immediately wanting to see patterns in things that are random, in that they see 3 lights, and naturally at night, if you see 3 lights, you think, are they 3 separate objects, or are they 3 lights on a very large object, a triangular-shaped object, if you see 3 lights apparently flying in formation? And you can see that this is where a lot of the idea about there being a triangular UFO came from. This thing that was seen on the 31st of March 1993. It's one of the few cases that we can actually say with certainty what was seen, and I can say with certainty that what was seen was part of a Russian satellite booster rocket that burnt up on re-entry. That was the UFO in this case. We can put a definite full stop on this one.
But Nick Pope was not convinced that the case could be closed completely. A hunch that would prove to be right. Investigations into a strange UFO across Britain on the night of March 30th, 1993, revealed a very ordinary explanation for this phenomenon. Booster rockets from a Russian spacecraft had re-entered the Earth's atmosphere at the right place, at the right time. But on closer examination, Nick Pope found that this explanation was deeply flawed.
Cosmos 2238 most certainly could explain some of the sightings that night, probably the high-altitude sightings at 1:10 past, but what it couldn't do is explain the whole event. It couldn't explain the sightings that took place at different times. It couldn't explain the sightings which were clearly of a structured craft at low altitude.
The powerful radio telescope at Jodrell Bank Observatory in Cheshire has been scanning the heavens for 50 years, most recently with the remit to actually look for signs of extraterrestrial life. Its director is Ian Morrison. He agrees that Cosmos cannot offer the solution to this mystery.
Sometimes people see a pattern of lights that stay pretty much in formation for maybe several minutes at a time. To be honest, I don't believe that can be the breakup of space junk or anything else. Those things are very short-lived and they all leave streaks, and the relative positions may well change as they travel at different speeds through the atmosphere.
At best, Cosmos 2238 may explain some of the first wave of high-altitude UFO reports Nick had received on the morning of March 31st, 1993. But they could not explain the far more troubling wave of sightings, the massive black triangle seen flying at low level near two of Britain's military bases earlier that same night. Hundreds of witnesses called the police, military bases, and the Ministry of Defence to report this UFO. But there were still many more who experienced this event and remained silent. Like Estelle Burridge, a local resident. She was passing RAF Shawbury in Shropshire at about 10 o'clock on the night of March the 30th. What she saw in the sky will live with her forever.
About 1.5 miles into my journey, I saw flashing lights to the right-hand side of me across the sky. I thought it was lightning, but I glimpsed across and there was all these bright lights, and they were making a noise like electric cables, crackling, buzzing, and I believe they were all connected up into one, making a craft. And I thought, goodness me, you know, all these lights, and they're like in an angle shape, flashing all the time. And it was so clear, and I just looked up into the sky and all these lights, and I just wanted to go home, you know. It's really, I've never seen anything like it before and never seen anything like it since.
Estelle's description matched what other eyewitnesses had reported seeing further to the south. A massive black triangular object, flying at low level and capable of superhuman speeds. There were many things that made this UFO incident unlike anything Nick Pope had ever dealt with. In particular, the quality of the witnesses. Many of these he classified as expert, including military personnel and police officers. These expert observers spoke to him because he was MOD. That they spoke at all was what Nick found most extraordinary. In his experience, people from the forces, military and civilian, are extremely reluctant to report UFOs for fear of professional ridicule. The statements from all of Nick Pope's key experts from the night of March 30th, 1993, including serving police officers, are contained in the case file. These reports included one of the most powerful and convincing witness accounts of a UFO Nick had ever experienced. It came from 2 RAF police officers on duty at RAF Cosford on the night of March the 30th and the early hours of March the 31st. This is an extract from the original statement. On 31st of March, 1993, I was on mobile patrol of Leeming Road adjacent to the gravel car park when I saw 2 bright lights in the sky above the airfield. They were creamy white in colour and consistent in size and relation to each other. I got out of the car. There was no sound of any engine noise, A slight red glow could be seen from these lights as they disappeared from view over the horizon. The officers immediately contacted surrounding air bases and air traffic control centers to find out what had been flying in the area that might account for the sighting. They drew a blank. There were no known aircraft in the vicinity at that time. Nick cross-checked this dramatic report with an account called in by another civilian near RAF Cosford at around the same time. It exactly matched what the two RAF police officers had seen. Creamy white lights and the unidentified object flying at an altitude of 900 to 1,000 feet. Then another extraordinary eyewitness account landed on Nick's desk. This one was from RAF Shawbury, 20 miles from RAF Cosford. The witness was a meteorological or Met officer.
From RAF Cosford, the object moved quickly to the next military base, Shawbury. It was seen by the Met officer here, and the report states that he saw the lights, observed them travel towards him over the airfield, moving erratically at hundreds of miles per hour, unlike any aircraft. He described the lights as being narrow like a laser beam, and he said it appeared to be searching for something on the ground. He'd been a Met officer for 8 years and had never seen anything like it before.
A Met officer at RAF Shawbury. 2 RAF policemen at RAF Cosford. Men who were used to seeing a multitude of aircraft on and over their bases. These were the people who usually helped Nick explain UFO sightings, but what they reported on the night in question was very clear. A low-flying craft of a type they had never seen before. Nick had to establish whether there was anything in the air over the RAF bases at the time of these eyewitness reports.
At any given time, we've got an extremely clear idea of what's flying in our airspace. We have a network of civil and military radar installations, and we have the space tracking radar at the Ballistic Missile Early Warning Centre at RAF Fylingdales.
London's Central Air Traffic Control Centre at West Drayton had radar records that clearly identified an aircraft over RAF Shawbury. David Clark, UFO investigator, thinks this provides the answer.
If you actually look at the Ministry of Defence file, the RAF did a radar rerun of the radar picture of the particular evening where the UFOs had been sighted. The result that came back from West Drayton actually identifies an aircraft overhead at RAF Shawbury at exactly the time. It's there in black and white in the file. 2:40 a.m. or 1:40 Zulu time at Shawbury, aircraft overhead, squawk. So presumably this UFO was actually talking to air traffic control.
This document here sets out a picture of the aerial activity that evening. I had gone to the air traffic control specialists and asked for a breakdown. What had been flying that night? Here it is, item by item. So we were able to have a look at this and see whether anything here might explain the UFO sightings. This line entry here is particularly interesting because it does talk about an aircraft overhead Shawbury. However, the crucial piece of information is in the last 3 digits. That's the flight level. And what this shows is that the aircraft was at a height of 20,000 feet.
20,000 feet was not what the 2 RAF policemen at Cosford or the Met officer at RAF Shawbury described seeing. They put the UFO at an altitude of around 1,000 feet. That's a significant difference. An aircraft at 20,000 feet would be difficult, if not impossible, to describe clearly. But at 1,000 feet, many people, let alone servicemen with this level of aviation knowledge, would be able to identify a known craft. These witnesses would have eliminated the obvious before putting their reputations on the line and reporting a UFO. Nick knew that a single high-altitude airliner couldn't explain sightings of a detailed unidentified craft seen across Britain for over 5 hours. But he was running out of ideas as to what might provide the answers. Nick Pope had one final possibility. Could this mysterious craft have been some form of top-secret prototype aircraft unknown to even Air Force personnel?
At any given time, of course, the UK will be testing prototype aircraft, but the key thing here is we know where we test our own bits of kit. If something had been seen and reported as a UFO, we would have simply been told, look, this is one of ours, there's no need to look any further.
Prototype aircraft, or black projects as they're called, have been the cause of many cases of alien mania. Before they were revealed to the public, America's B-2 stealth bomber and the F-117 stealth fighter aircraft were often reported as UFOs. The extreme secrecy surrounding the development and testing of prototype military aircraft fuels the conspiracy theorists and those who want to believe that we are not alone. But Nick Pope was neither of those, and as the man running the MOD's UFO desk, he could ask a serious question in the right places. Did Britain have a test aircraft over RAF Shawbury and RAF Cosford on the night of March the 30th, 1993? The answer he got back was no. That left only one other possible line of inquiry. Could a foreign government have been flying covert tests of a new aircraft over British Air Force bases without permission?
For some years, there had been rumours of a secret hypersonic prototype aircraft, codenamed Aurora, operated by the Americans over the UK. We made inquiries through the embassy and were given government-to-government assurances on this. Indeed, the issue was raised in Parliament and definitive answers were given. Aurora did not exist.
But Nick wanted to double-check. On April 22nd, 1993, nearly a month after the mysterious wave of UFO sightings, he initiated high-level contact with the US government. He wanted to know if the Americans had been operating any type of covert aircraft in British skies.
My head of division wrote to the American embassy, and he asked, in view of these UFO sightings and in view of the rumours about Aurora, whether the Americans had operated any sort of aircraft that might explain what had been seen.
The response Nick received was nothing short of astonishing. It seemed that the Americans wanted to know if the British had any black projects involving a new type of aircraft. Nick realized that the American government had been investigating UFOs of their own. Back in 1993, Nick Pope had done everything in his power to solve Britain's UFO mystery. He had asked every question he could at every level, from members of the public to expert eyewitnesses. He'd examined radar tapes and satellite data. He'd even rattled the cage at the highest levels of the British and American governments. Only to discover that while Britain was conducting its investigation, it seemed the Americans were chasing reports of similar UFOs in their own skies.
Publicly, the Americans have been out of the UFO game since 1969, when Project Blue Book was closed. This fascinating document here from the Assistant Chief, He says, "You will recall that my earlier interest was prompted by a question from our air attaché in Washington seeking advice on whether the UK had any black program. So clearly, while we were asking the Americans if they had a secret aircraft that could explain the UFO sightings, the American authorities had been investigating sightings of their own and asking if the British had something that might explain what was seen."
The complete file of Nick's investigation was obtained under the Freedom of Information Act, but the copy of the letter from the Americans is missing. While the Ministry of Defense doesn't deny the letter's existence, they have no explanation for why it has disappeared from Nick Pope's official case file. But in 1993, Nick's remit was clear. He wasn't hired to chase UFOs. He was hired as a layer of protection for Britain's defences.
My job was not to prove the existence of UFOs at all. No, my job was to assess the UFO reports and satisfy myself, and therefore satisfy the department, there was no evidence of any threat, no evidence of anything of any defence significance.
And in this case, although something had clearly penetrated British airspace and passed over two of Britain's key Air Force bases, it had never returned. So the craft, whatever it was not considered a risk to security. Frustratingly for Nick, the case had to be closed. Nick had to write his final report. Just like the Rendlesham case, it would be inconclusive.
Type of craft, unknown. Origin of craft, unknown. Motive of occupants, unknown.
Having eliminated all obvious avenues, Nick was facing an uncomfortable possibility. Could the events of that night have been a real close encounter? Nick Pope left his desk at the Secretariat of Air Staff 2A in 1994 to take up another post within the Ministry of Defence. He had done his job to evaluate and assess events of any defence significance. But he had failed to find the rational explanation he had hoped for. This case had really got under his skin.
I conducted this investigation with a completely open mind. I wanted to solve the case, just as I wanted to solve all UFO sightings that I investigated. But at the end of the day, I was forced to say that none of the usual explanations added up. This was some sort of exotic craft of unknown origin. I didn't know what it was.
For 10 years, Nick Pope lived with the uneasy feeling that this case left with him. But officially, there was nothing he could do. Then the introduction of the Freedom of Information Act revealed, for the very first time, the full extent of Nick's investigation. And lurking within the records, the MOD's equivalent of the X-Files, was a summary of his investigation, written for and approved by Nick's MOD superiors.
There's a statement here which is, I think, quite unprecedented in the MOD's X-Files, and it says, in summary, there would seem to be some evidence on this occasion that an unidentified object or objects of unknown origin was operating over the UK.
It is possibly the most telling official statement ever made about a UFO incident in Britain. A top-level acknowledgement that there was some evidence of an unidentified flying object. These were Nick's bosses, senior-level MOD personnel, putting their signature to the fact that this was a genuine UFO. Nick's investigation had been methodical and meticulous, and now he knew that it had been taken very seriously at the highest levels of the government and military. The quality of the witnesses and the evidence he gathered did more than just convince his superiors. It convinced him. He'd turned from skeptic to believer.
Could it have been extraterrestrial? When we look at the speeds and manoeuvres of this craft, which go way beyond anything we have, I think there's some intriguing evidence to point towards that. This was not a misidentification of any conventional object or phenomena. It wasn't some secret prototype craft. It was a genuine UFO, a real unknown. Could it have been extraterrestrial? Yes, it could.
Whatever was in the British skies on the night of March the 30th, 1993, wasn't just unidentifiable. It was undeniable.
For 40 years, Defense Ministry policy regarding UFOs was to deny, deflect, or dismiss all sightings. This 1952 document to then Prime Minister Winston Churchill reveals that UFOs were routinely explained away as everything from lunar eclipses and lousy weather to stray birds and optical illusions. Not until 1991 did things change, when a diligent government worker named Nick Pope put his career on the line by exposing what he believes to be an alarming threat from outer space.
I cannot stay silent about what I believe we must treat as a potential threat.
When Pope first accepted his assignment to process UFO reports at the Defense Ministry, he was as skeptical about alien spacecraft as the long line of civil servants who had preceded him. But then he started reading the reports.
It seemed strange to me that none of my predecessors had really seemed to take this very seriously. My brief at the Ministry of Defence was to look for evidence of a threat to the defence of the UK. I felt that I couldn't make a decision about whether there was or was not a threat until I'd done a full investigation.
For Pope, that meant personally interviewing eyewitnesses and established UFO researchers.
For a Ministry of Defence officer to start talking with UFO researchers was unheard of, and it was very much frowned upon in his office. I remember he told me at the time that, it was rather like sleeping with the enemy.
As UFO reports by the hundreds crossed Pope's desk, he began to believe that the phenomenon had serious national and global implications.
Was there a point in time at which you became someone who said, there's really something here?
Yes, I think 31st of March 1993, when I got into work, and during that day, I suppose, took several dozen calls from people, a lot of police and a lot of military witnesses, saying that they had seen a structured craft. I had reports, for example, from a meteorological officer, a chap with 8 years of experience of looking at the night sky and judging what the weather was going to be so that he could brief the air crew. As he put it to me, it behaved like nothing he had ever seen before in his entire life. He did not have the slightest idea what it was, and it passed straight over the top of the base.
This was not the last time Pope would hear about the silent Vulcans. The reports were particularly disturbing because these UFOs seemed to be targeting military bases and were impossible to trace.
The disturbing thing was that these didn't show up on radar at all, so we never got our air defense aircraft off the ground. That worries me, that something which you've got to regard as potentially hostile until you know what it is, what it's doing, can get slap bang over the top of a military installation without showing up on the radar, without us getting any air defense assets even deployed.
You determined that there might well be threats to national security, and yet nobody listened, right? Your superiors weren't interested in what you had to say?
People don't like admitting that they've been wrong, and it's much easier for them to just say, no, maybe Nick Pope was wrong, maybe he's misinterpreting the data. I just can't support that view. I was the one getting the raw data. I was doing the investigation.
Did anyone ever come along and tell you to calm down a little bit and cool it?
Yes, on one or two occasions, people said to me, I think you're devoting a little bit too much time and effort into this.
The official angle, of course, has always been very much the typical stiff British upper lip. It's all foolish nonsense, there's nothing to it, and that's all I'm going to tell you.
UFO magazine has done a series of articles on Nick Pope. It believes the British government is hiding UFO secrets which dwarf Pope's revelations.
The Cold War may be over, but here in Great Britain, we still shiver sometimes because of the secrecy.
Some others would suggest that Nick Pope basically was just the front man for a grand cover-up.
Well, I don't think there is any great cover-up in Britain. I think that what we actually have is a position where people, far from knowing too much about the phenomenon and then keeping it all under wraps, know corporately far too little about it. The best way to study the real UFOs, as I like to call them, was to very quickly eliminate the ones that were just misidentifications. 9 out of 10 of them did have conventional explanations.
What do you think people are seeing in that 10% of the cases where there are not prosaic answers for UFOs?
I certainly believe that some of them are extraterrestrial spacecraft, that quite simply elsewhere in the universe, other intelligences have evolved and are doing what, after all, we ourselves are now beginning to do, to go out into space and to see what's out there.
Unlike his counterparts in the United States, Nick Pope has not felt constrained to keep out of the UFO limelight. At lectures and on television, Pope has continued to bring his message and his warning to the British people.
What I'm trying to do is to give a flavour of what has been an extraordinarily uneasy and difficult relationship between the world of officialdom in the UK and this incredibly elusive, mysterious UFO subject.
In his book about his experiences at the British Ministry of Defence, Pope concludes, "We all like to think we're in control, but what happens when we're not? What happens when we refuse to accept that a threat even exists, let alone do anything to counter it? This is the ultimate dilemma about UFOs, which we must face. We can't begin to find any solution until we first acknowledge that there is a problem."
There is an ongoing program to declassify and release as many of the old UFO files as possible. It's a big job. The MOD's UFO project dates back to 1950. There have been over 10,000 UFO sightings reported to the department. So there are many, many more UFO documents and files still to be released. And there are some fantastic cases in there. So prepare to be amazed.